Hello and welcome to another episode of Clean Talk, the Infection Control Podcast. I am your host, Brad Whitchurch, and we are coming to you live from the Seal Shield Studios in beautiful downtown Orlando, Florida. Very excited about our guest today. Julie Sufana is the Chief Marketing Officer at contextflow. Julie, we're really excited to have you on the show today. Welcome to Clean Talk.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here as well.
Well, we're excited to have you, and I know that you're calling in from Europe, so appreciate you being here with the time change. I know it's late over there. Julie, what can you tell us about your background and why you're on Clean Talk today?
Well, I'm on Clean Talk because you have a fabulous team who found me on LinkedIn and sent me an invitation.
Thank you.
But my background is a little bit probably more eclectic than maybe some of your other guests. So I'm originally from Chicago. And I moved to Vienna, Austria in 2016 to earn my master's degree at the Vienna School of Business and Economics, in marketing, of course. And as a result, a colleague in that program was actually sharing some office space with another startup called contextflow at the time, and they were looking for some extra help. So that's how I got connected with my current company. And I think it was really appealing to me because contextflow is an AI and radiology startup. So we develop computer-aided detection software specifically targeted towards the chest at the moment. And, you know, in marketing, there's many avenues that you can take. And what appealed to me about contextflow was its potential impact globally on healthcare and radiology specifically. So I really feel that my work is contributing in some small way, but to a larger ideal to really help physicians and in turn patients receive better care.
Well, that's why we are in the healthcare business, right? We all share that mission, and certainly an important mission at contextflow. AI, very exciting. We love getting emerging technologies on this show. And so I'd love to find out more about the solutions that contextflow has and how you're using AI to improve patient and practitioner outcomes.
Sure. So I think maybe it might help to give the audience a little bit of context specifically. So as I mentioned, we focus currently using our AI on chest, specifically chest CT. And the reason why we do that is because the chest is actually very complicated. There's a lot of diseases and cancers that can exist, and it's very difficult for the human eye alone to detect that. So there's disease patterns, and they don't just segment themselves nice and cleanly, right? They kind of blend in and overlap. And so this is something that a human brain is not very good at assessing, and where AI can really make an impact. So what we do is we analyze chest CTs for 19 different patterns. That's actually the most comprehensive solution on the market. And we have 4 main features. So maybe I can go through each one to explain. So the original product or the original idea was actually part of a European Union research project. And the idea there was to enable hospitals to search through their data archives, like a search and detect system. Initially, people maybe thought they referred to it kind of as a Google for medical images. And we took that idea and it turned it into, yes, a system that could help a radiologist faster and more accurately determine what was going on with these complicated chest patients. So what we do is enable them to select like a region of interest in a scan, and then we actually provide them with reference cases from patients similar to theirs. If you know anything about AI, you know that it often has a reputation for being kind of a black box problem, right? Where people are just getting results and they don't know why. So our system actually enables them to see these reference patients, and they can kind of compare and contrast and see why our results are showing what they do. So that's one portion, search. And we also link the radiologist directly to medical literature within that program, because for complicated cases, sometimes they need to talk to, the specialist in a particular area. Well, what if they're on vacation or busy with something else, or they see an image and they need to describe it somehow. And so if you don't know what you're looking at, that's really hard to put in text. So again, we link them to medical literature that based on the visual disease pattern detection, that the AI is also pulling up kind of this helpful information along the side. So that's one area. Another thing that the product can do is provide an analysis in terms of quantifications for 8 key lung disease patterns. So again, as I mentioned, the human eye, not so great at being able to take 3D images in our heads and figure out like what's happening. If you ask different radiologists about the same patient, they will probably tell you different things. And so we try to lend some objectivity. So again, we're able to quantify how much of a disease pattern is present within a patient. And of course, that really helps them with their reporting. We also search for lung nodules. That's a very kind of time-consuming and frankly, not very interesting or fun task that radiologists have to do to follow their various screening guidelines. So we can detect and provide measurements for that and provide it in reporting form. And then last but not least, the newest feature that we have is called Timeline. And we enable radiologists to see changes in their patient over time. So this is just currently impossible for them. A lot of patients have to come for follow-ups, of course. And the radiologist is sitting there with multiple scans maybe, or just the previous one, and they're trying to figure out, is the treatment working or not? And this is something where we can actually show them multiple previous scans over time and quantify again, is that tumor growing? Is it shrinking? And truly, is your treatment working or not? So it's currently something that is just not available to them. They don't have tools, and that's what contextflow is bringing to the market.
Well, it seems like a natural progression, and we know that AI is coming in the world in all kinds of various forms. I don't think we have to quite worry about Terminator and Skynet just yet, but it seems like a natural progression for radiology. We know that the radiologists are highly skilled with discerning eyes. You have to be, because I look at those charts and I don't see any of the things they're talking about. But we have a human element here, right, that AI can improve. And so it seems like a natural progression to me, and it has to improve the outcomes with so many variables to consider and such really minute details in the CT scans.
And you bring up a point. So with the Terminator, because I think a lot of people in our industry initially thought, oh, radiologists are going to be replaced now by AI. I don't actually think that's the case. So we provide like clinical decision support, but in the future, I expect radiologists and AI to be working side by side. You know, patients also really want a human being behind their decision making, because again, AI in so many ways has a black box. And so they want someone to sit there and interpret those results and be able to talk to them in a human way about it. And also the current state of AI in radiology is very much in its infancy. I think that a lot of people, again, expected, oh, there was this big hype, and now we're kind of over the hype curve and really understanding what AI can do and also what it can't do. So it's actually a really exciting time. I think it's going to be exciting for many years. But yeah, in case anyone's thinking, oh, are machines just going to read my scans and that's it in the future? No, they're not.
No, of course not. And you mentioned that AI is in its infancy, certainly in this area specifically. How long have you been working on this issue at contextflow? I know that there had to be a lot of development that went into this solution. How long have you guys been around, and how long has this product been in the market?
So actually, the European research project that I mentioned, on which our tech stack was initially based, started in 2010. So that ran for about 4 years until 2014. And then the co-founders kind of got together and said, well, we can either let this research just kind of languish in academia, or we can try and bring it to the market. And based on the feedback responses from physicians that they received, they thought, okay, I think we should really try to bring this to market. So we were founded in 2016. Our first product was available for purchase in the EU market as of 2021. And we are certified as a Class 2A medical device under the medical device, the MDR, so medical device regulation, which is actually a really big deal because the law changed recently. And so there's only a handful of AI companies that have that distinction. What that means is in about another year or two, anyone who doesn't have that MDR distinction is no longer allowed to sell their product on the market. So we're very happy to have that already. And then I know you're located in Orlando, and probably many of your listeners are in the US or Canada. So we are currently in the 510(k) pre-submission process with the FDA specifically for nodule detection. And then the next thing that we will work on, we expect that actually early next year, the clearance there. And then the next thing that we will be working on with the FDA is to bring this timeline feature to enable, again, radiologists to see changes in those lung nodules over time.
Well, that's fantastic. We can't wait for that FDA certification so we can be seeing those products in wide use here in the US. You talked initially about one of the benefits, and you kind of mentioned the issues with data and EMR. How are you helping solve the issues around built-up data?
So built-up data is a very good point that you bring up. So if you think, hospitals have been taking scans, X-rays, CTs, MRs for years, and that data just sits there. Some of it is digitized, some of it isn't. But actually, this is a really, really vast and very rich resource of data by which we could use it to create new AI and algorithms. And that's one of the number one challenges for companies in the market to create tools, is that you have to have a specific type of data. It has to be organized in a certain fashion. It has to be of a certain quality. And so hospitals are essentially sitting on data silos that could be used to help their current patients. So basically the past patients helping the future patients. And right now they have no means to be able to do that. So that is one thing that we do in terms of development. We pick our partners actually really carefully because they also have to be able to provide, as I said, this very specific type of data. But as I mentioned previously with this search function, the idea is that we can technically enable a hospital or an imaging center to kind of order their archives in a way that they could actually search and bring up old documents. So one thing we hear from physicians is when they see kind of an unusual case, they think, oh, I remember I had something similar several years ago, but they don't have any way of going back to pull up that case. And so that's one thing that our search feature would enable them to do, is to find a similar case to their current one and understand from the reporting what's likely happening with this new patient sitting in front of them.
Can you tell us a little more about that? How AI integrates with data management? What does that process look like? Because we know certainly here in the US, so many the hospitals have gone through EMR transitions and they've taken their written medical records and digitized them. So how do we do the AI integration with data management? What does that process involve?
So I'm definitely not the expert, but at contextflow specifically, we have some data engineers, and their whole job is to work with our clinical partners to specify what type of data can be provided, what are the parameters by which we need. So that has to be a very collaborative process, actually. And then we actually developed our own annotation tool. So what happens with training of AI is, you have a raw picture, but the AI doesn't know what to do with that picture unless you give it kind of little notes, right? So that's the annotations that we need. And we work with practicing radiologists to mark a certain set of images from which we can train the AI, and the AI can also start to learn to create its own kind of example. So we have a very efficient and I would say like low bar to entry annotation and curation process. And then from there, once that data is cataloged, then that comes the job of the research and development team to look at different machine learning models and methods to come up with the best results. So it's just constantly testing, iterating. But for the data itself, definitely that's, as I mentioned, very collaborative with the hospitals and the imaging centers. And of course, we need to make sure that we're following any GDPR or HIPAA compliance regulations. So about what data can we actually use to be commercialized and what is not. And I know that's going to be a big topic and leads to a whole other probably episode as to how the regulatory bodies want to kind of handle that, because currently there's a lot of places in the world where there's just no agreement on should we use this data from the past, because it could be really helpful, but obviously maybe an individual patient doesn't want their data to be used in the future. And I think people should really be transparent about what is obviously happening with their imaging records.
If you're watching the show live and you have a question for Julie, go ahead and put it in the Q&A box, send it over, and we'll take your question live on the air. We do have a message from Oliver Van Exum, who's our friend over in Belgium, and he just wants to remind me, just for the record, some listeners from Europe too. So shout out to Oliver over there. That's right. Hello to Belgium. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll ask Julie. Julie, you know that we're primarily an infection prevention podcast. We do love talking about technology on this show. What potential benefits do you see for the work that you're doing at contextflow on the infection prevention side? Is there any benefit to the outcomes for infection preventionists or for nosocomial infections in general in healthcare?
Yeah, so, and maybe not infection specifically with viral, but we're working a lot with like lung cancer. So, right, early detection is really important. And a lot of countries have now modified their lung cancer screening programs. And which is great for the patient, but on the other hand, what we do know is that there's a shortage of radiologists and maybe not enough technicians or not enough scanners to actually fulfill those requirements. So they're going to need to adopt more and more AI tools to really help them with that workflow. So one thing that's new for contextflow, we're working with a company called Reveal DX. They're based out of Seattle, Washington. And they developed a little component called Reveal AI Lung. And they call this a malignancy score index. And basically this relates to characterization of a lung nodule. So we can start to determine from an initial scan whether or not a patient is likely for this nodule to be malignant or not, for example. And so while we can't prevent that cancer, we can prevent a lot of unnecessary scans. We do know that there's a certain portion of scans that are definitely like false positives or false negatives. And not only does that increase, the burden on the healthcare system in terms of costs and scheduling and everything, but that's also really anxiety producing for the patient if they think, oh, I have lung cancer, and then it turns out later on that they actually don't, and they had to undergo multiple scans. So that's one area that we're working on. I think a lot of people think of pharmaceutical companies when they think of infection prevention, and so obviously, in the era of COVID, they're working on lots of medications and the vaccines and indicators for COVID, but obviously for many different respiratory diseases. And so we can actually provide clinical biomarkers to those pharmaceutical companies to help them with their trials, right? So to be able to show them the quantifications to know if something's working or not, as well as those changes in the patient over time, given the various treatments that they may be testing. So I think probably those are the two main ways that we can look at contextflow as having a prevention component.
So early, accurate diagnosis and superior pharma development. Is that about right?
Exactly. And I should make the point that, for a lot of lung disease, once it's detected, a patient needs to be on medication for the rest of their life. And obviously we want to prevent that disease from progressing any more than necessary. So definitely the earlier the detection, in that case, the better. And so being able to have screening early and accurately is really of paramount importance. And so hopefully we can play a little role there.
And today the product is being primarily targeted towards radiologists. Is that correct?
Exactly. So that was the initial idea. We're working with medical images, specifically 3D medical images. But in the future, of course, working more with pharmaceutical companies, working specifically right now with many PACS partners. I don't know if that's something that everyone in your audience would know, but a PACS is short for Picture Archiving Communication System. So pretty much anything that your physician sees, maybe they're typing in their little workstation, that software is typically a PACS. And so you can think of them as kind of enabling all of our little vendors like us to have plugins and programs to cover a specific disease or organ, modality, et cetera. And so it's really, really key for the industry in general that to enable any physician to take benefit of our software, we need to have a really tight integration. So the fewer clicks, the better. We don't want them to click out of their workflow. So that's definitely a long process and probably another topic that I can spiral a little bit deeper into. But I would say integration is really key in that area.
Well, that's actually very timely. We've received a question online. Mark Darren asks, does your product link directly with the treatment planning systems used by the linear accelerator manufacturers?
It doesn't link directly with the treatment program yet. So you can think right now of contextflow. I should back up. It really depends on the PACS vendor, right? So every PACS kind of has a different capability and different state of development. And so what we have are some deep integration features that we are capable of providing those quantifications directly into the PACS, so the native viewer for the radiologist. But there's also other PACS where that's just not possible for them yet. And so in that case, it's like a one-click API. You see a little contextflow logo either already within your viewer, or maybe you right-click and then it opens up our UI into another browser tab. With timeline, the idea is that the radiologist is going to see very quickly whether a patient is getting, whether that treatment is helping or not. But as of right now, you bring up a very good point in that the integration is still very early on. And so it's not automatically getting sent to any type of treatment software. It's just, okay, the radiologist can put that information into their report. And we expect that this will save them a lot of time when preparing for follow-ups or tumor boards or those multidisciplinary meetings, because sometimes, if it's a complex case, they may be taking an hour or even just a half hour is a lot of time when you have a lot of patients that you have to discuss individually.
Well, Julie, the whole world has been living under this COVID cloud, and obviously COVID, a respiratory illness. Did you see any changes, or were there any emerging opportunities specific to COVID? Was this technology being utilized in any type of respiratory diagnosis or secondary infections around COVID patients?
Yeah, so we did some research in that area, but unfortunately, if you look at the medical literature at this point, the data sets that many companies and many researchers tried to come up with like an algorithm, right, for detecting COVID. And what we found was just that the quality and the amount of data that we could get is just not enough, right? Because hospitals are overwhelmed and they don't have time to sit there and say, okay, let me send you all this data. In the midst of a pandemic, they had bigger and better things to do. So one thing that we do know is, and one thing that we do provide are heat maps, distribution heat maps for these disease patterns. And COVID is no different from any other pneumonia in terms of the disease pattern present, but what is different is the distribution, right? So COVID tends to locate itself lower in the lungs than maybe a standard pneumonia, which hopefully stays more up in the upper part of the lungs. So now if a radiologist is using contextflow and they see, oh, there's some consolidation or ground glass patterns, those are kind of key indicators for potentially COVID. And if it's maybe located lower, that might indicate to them that this is a suspected COVID patient, but I wouldn't go so far as to say we're detecting COVID. Actually, I don't know anyone on the market who is doing that at the moment.
What other technology applications do you see in the future for AI, whether it's in radiology or some other area? Are there some other applications that you're looking at or that you're currently developing? Can you talk at all about that?
Yeah, I think we're really focused right now on providing the most comprehensive solution for chest because of its complexity. But the original tech stack was actually built to be very flexible. So we can extend it to other organs and modalities, again, if we have the right type of data. But what we've seen in the industry is actually a lot of consolidation. So initially, if you think about it, it's not easy, but it's easier to bring a product onto the market if you're just kind of looking for one or two things. So initially, that's what we saw was products that just look for nodules, and they'll just tell you, yes, the patient has a nodule, yes or no, here's what it is, and that's it. And we took kind of a much more different approach, a much broader approach to say, well, that's great, but like the patient could also have many other things. So wouldn't it be nice to have a more holistic view of the patient all at once? So we started from there, and we thought maybe that we would initially extend to some other organs and modalities. And the feedback that we got from the market was like, we actually really like what you're doing. We want you to go deeper. So that's where we're really focusing right now on chest, providing multiple scans over time, again, for patients with timeline. Some of the other things that are upcoming, I briefly mentioned these malignancy scores. So that's really going to help radiologists, I think, be able to save both on time and false positives and false negatives. So again, helping the patient not to be so stressed. A couple other things that I probably shouldn't talk about, but yeah, the idea is that we provide comprehensive chest solutions. As far as the industry is concerned, there's a lot of AI applications that are super cool. What we see more and more is the need for small hospitals and clinics to have some type of vendor to help them adopt AI. So there's AI companies helping to bring AI into the workplace. So that's actually really exciting. And all of the big players, your Siemens, your GE, Sectra, Fuji, all of these companies are also really working hard to bring AI to every single part of not just a radiologist, but the physician's workflow. So that could be anything from when a test or scan is initially performed, making sure that it goes maybe to the right place instead of having to go through like a gatekeeper to send it on to a specialist, that it could go directly to the specialist, for example. So there's a lot of talk around triaging, also a lot of areas with quality assurance that AI can do. So we know that humans are imperfect, even the very best physicians, and they are really, really super, the radiologists that we work with, but they know that they get tired or they get sick and the AI just doesn't, right? So it's nice that either within the workflow or maybe at a certain time interval set by a department, that an AI tool can go back and take a look at what was marked or what was indicated on a report and just see, oh, was there maybe anything that was missed that they should also take a look at. I'm an American. It's a little bit different in the US than it is in Europe, but I think we're actually a pretty litigious society in the US, right? There's a lot of medical malpractice suits that happen every year that are very expensive. So if an AI tool, like we can also do that with contextflow, can prevent even one lawsuit because we found some, missed finding, and that's certainly worth it for the hospital and medical center to adopt these tools. And obviously for the patient, because at the end of the day, I'm a patient, you're a patient, and we all just want in our time of need, the best and the fastest and just the most non-BS objective information that we can have, so that we really have, facts at hand from which we can move forward. So I hope that kind of gives you an answer of indicator overall. Very much all different aspects of healthcare are being affected by AI right now.
Well, we all want to improve healthcare, and certainly AI is touching every industry now, and it will only continue to grow. And it's a natural for applications in healthcare, just like the radiology CT applications that you guys are doing. I commend you. We know how difficult it is to be an innovator in healthcare technology. You've had that experience. I'm going to put you on the spot, Julie. Now that you are an experienced developer in the healthcare technology field, what have you learned or found out that makes you say, this is something we could improve, or this is something that I'd like to see changed? Is there anything that you would say, hey, we should look into improving this, or I wish we could do something to change this?
So many things. One, I think as a patient, right, we often complain that we don't get a lot of time with the doctor. We don't feel seen necessarily in a human way. And a lot of that's because of the structures that have been put in place, right? About financial matters, the need to see a certain number of patients in a certain amount of time. And so for me, it's important that our AI can actually help free up some of that time for the radiologist. So they're probably going to maybe work the same hours, but if they could spend more time with the patient or having a good report that's really clear to the patient, that is something that I would like to see. Like, definitely don't want to walk away from an appointment, and I think it's probably happened to all of us, where we're like, what did they say? And I didn't quite get that, and now I need to Google, right? These are highly emotional meetings, and so that's definitely something I would like to see differently. I would like that people understand from the physician side, like what the limitations of AI are. So we don't always want to just say, oh, we're the greatest and the best and you should trust us no matter what. Like, no, you should definitely have a process by which you're evaluating your AI vendors and how transparent they are, and do they have the ability to maybe collaborate with you and co-develop with you? Because you obviously are the one working in clinical routine day out, and we aren't. So we take those conversations very seriously. And I think last but not least, just the general workflow. So workflow actually takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money. And there's still mistakes that happen. So again, if we can cut down the time, that means they either have more time for patients, they have more time to see patients, so that there's not such backlogs, people aren't waiting so long to receive reports, things like this. So it's really about, can we find efficiencies in the market that make physicians happier, that lead to, reduce the amount of burnout that we're seeing on a global scale, but also just, again, filter back to the patient and make them feel seen and heard, and that they understand these very difficult terms that are being thrown their way.
Well, Julie, those are great observations that I think we can all agree with. We do have one final question from a viewer. Oliver asks, what is the timeline typically needed to teach your system to recognize, that's in quotes, all these different issues in time or number of examples? How realistic is it to include rather exotic health issues in the matrix of items to recognize? Is that something you can address?
Yeah, so what I will say, as I mentioned, we detect 19 different disease patterns. And to be honest, there's only about 25, 30 patterns that are actually would cover pretty much the entire spectrum of lung disease. They're actually very close to covering that entire spectrum right now.
And that's the plans?
Exactly. So with each new release, we tend to add another pattern or two. But of course, it really depends on the quality of that data. So there are some things that are so rare, and you have to have a certain number. You can train AI on 2 scans, but your output is going to be
not
very
exactly
subpar,
right.
And a professional way of saying that. So there's no correct number of scans for any one thing. It's just you kind of know that you've hit it when you start to see good results for training, and each pattern is actually different. So some things are easier to recognize, and some patterns look very similar to each other, and then it's more difficult for the AI to determine that. So maybe that's not the most satisfying answer, because
I think that's a great answer.
But
I think that's a great answer, and you're working on those gaps. Any other predictions for the future for contextflow or for AI in healthcare?
Yeah, well, specifically for contextflow, I think we more and more are becoming a global company. So we have actually employees, about 50 now, from over 20 different countries. So when you have global people, they also tend to have a global eye on the market. So that's something that, as I mentioned, expanding to North America, but also to Asia or the Middle East, and Australia would probably be like the next steps in terms of whom we can help. And for AI and radiology specifically, I think it still boils down to this concept that, man and machine, or human and machine, are going to work together. This is not, in my mind, a question of, the machines are going to replace us. That's also not the healthcare that I want to receive. But I do want to know that maybe there's like a secondary or a catch-all for that time when my radiologist, when someone called out sick and they're working a double or triple and they're on their 10th coffee, and maybe they could actually use some support from AI as well. It's always nice to know that there's kind of that second set of eyes looking at things. So I think what I want to impress is that clinical decision support is just that. It's support. It's not a replacement for the radiologist. They're very well trained in what they do, and they very much have a purpose, and will continue to have such a significant purpose in the future.
Fantastic stuff on AI. Our guest today has been Julie Sufana, Chief Marketing Officer with contextflow. Julie, we're so excited that you've been on the show today. If you're watching our show live and you want to see it again, you can watch all of our episodes on cleantalk.tv or on YouTube, and go to cleantalk.tv to register to be a part of our community. Watch us live every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Until next Wednesday, I'm your host, Brad Whitchurch, for my guest, Julie Sufana, telling you to keep it clean.